Imagine that each morning when you wake up, you're smiling and looking forward to your day, knowing that you're happy, even while dealing with grief and loss. The Grief and Happiness podcast inspires, comforts, and supports you with each new episode. For more support, check out the Grief and Happiness Handbook and cards. I welcome you to listen to this podcast and discover endless possibilities for your life. Aloha, welcome to my Grief and Happiness podcast today. A very interesting guest. He's an author, and we'll have a nice conversation with Steve Beal, right? Steve, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Well, I wrote a book. It's called Generation Jumping, and it was never intended to be a book. It's kind of a collection of notes and journal entries and so forth over a period of time of losing family along the way. I come from a very strong Christian family of faith, and I've lost a lot of members of our family, unfortunately. For a number of reasons, I'm happy about this conversation today because going through the process of writing the book and recording these things was quite a different experience. I'm not a writer, really. I guess I am now because I have a book, but I'm more of a storyteller and I'd rather just get together with people and visit and hear about what's going on in their lives as much as my own and find common connections in doing so.
One of the main reasons that I wanted to interview you in particular is because I teach all the time writing through grief to help you deal with your grief. And that's what you did kind of in just a natural form and in a storytelling form. And I love that because I think storytelling is so essential for a lot of reasons. One, for passing down your history, for getting familiar with things with your family, because I know when I've been like sitting around a group of family members, somebody will start telling a story and somebody else will go, well, that's not the way I remembered it. And we kind of weave the stories together because everybody sees things from a little bit different point of view. So it's really nice to have the things down that you wrote about, because so many times they get lost because a lot of times there's no family to tell them to. I know in my family, I was the youngster because my sister was born and then the war started and the World War II. And at that time, they weren't drafting anybody who was married to start off with. And then it was anybody who was married and had children. And then they started drafting them too. So Dad ultimately got drafted. And there was a long time between when Mom and Dad were together. And so I'm 9 years younger than my sister is. And most of my family was born in my sister's age group. So like everybody else is gone, and all I have are those stories that we fortunately shared when we were having family holidays. Like we'd always have Christmas together and Easter together and different celebrations like that. And I'm so grateful for those because that's how I really got to know my family and my heritage. And unfortunately, in my family, nobody wrote them down the way that you did. And I just loved what you did. Can you tell us about kind of what you learned in the process of writing it all down?
One of the things that's always run in the back of my mind is from Psalm 103, and I'll just share this really quick. It's the life of mortals is like grass. They flourish like a flower of the field. The wind blows over it, and it is gone, and its place remembers it no more. That's heartbreaking to me to have a full life lived. And the Johnny Cash song mentioned the words of like living and dying was all that he did. What about the 50, 60, 80 years of stories and experiences and so forth? So I was the kid that hated school. I was a dreamer. I wanted to be a professional athlete, and I couldn't get out of school fast enough. And then for some reason, because I've probably been tracking stats and scorebooks and things all my life, I kept notes while making visits with my parents and family up in New Brunswick specifically. And those notes ultimately became a book. And that wasn't even the reason. But what was the reason is I noticed, I lost my dad. It'll be 10 years ago next month. You and I were talking beforehand, and he was gone, and mom is still here. So this became a race for me to get a book out, or at least a record of the history of the family and all those wonderful stories and those ordinary people that lived in extraordinary moments. And I was so rewarded and so blessed to be a part of those as an adult. Certainly, I never thought as a kid that I'd be an adult with these people at the same time. I guess I'm still the big kid. I'm more comfortable at the kids' table. But the notes became that book, and it became a race to get this out while my mom was still alive, to get this out while my oldest aunt, who's 91 years old, is still in New Brunswick, Canada, to get that out while she's still alive, and just pay tribute to her husband. He's one of the chapters in the book. My dad is the whole last third of the book, really, which was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. And to answer your question, that was, though I had lived through his death almost 9 years ago when I was going through this manuscript, it's the hardest thing I ever did was still write that all these years later about my father.
That's amazing. As you were talking, I thought, boy, I wish I would have been doing that, because I wrote a lot of stories, and I came from a small town, and I tended to not write about anybody I knew, any of my relatives and stuff. And they had really fascinating stories, and a lot of them I didn't learn about until it was too late for me to ask questions of anybody to get clarification. My grandmother was married twice, and I didn't realize that. I thought that all of her children had the same father, and, and that was in those days how things were. But her first husband, she had two children, and then he died when he was at work. He lived far away from the closest hospital, and he got sick at work, so they put him on the train to send him to the hospital, and he died on the train of appendicitis. That was such an interesting story to me. I would have liked to have known more about it, and I didn't. I happened to find some love letters and found out some interesting, really beautiful things. And I was really glad I found those, because otherwise, I wouldn't have ever known that story or been able to share it with the rest of the family, because I hadn't heard it from any of my cousins. When we talked about family things, I just didn't know. So it's your book is a blessing for your family, and all the different things that they can go, oh yeah, I remember that, or oh, I didn't know that.
Well, and one of the real joys, despite the grieving that's ongoing while you're truly losing somebody, right, was our memories are like any other muscle, and the longer you go without using it, the more you lose. But it is able to be cultivated. And my favorite thing this is God's honest truth, became just prying a little bit with questions, and then taking whatever memory came and just trying to dress it up and build it up so that they'd remember more. And it led to some of the most, I don't even know, just beautiful conversations. You could literally see an aspect of these people's lives come back to life literally in front of you. And it was amazing. I don't have any formal education on these things, but it was, I don't know how you wouldn't want to spend time doing that with somebody, especially somebody that you respect or that you love. Or even for me, which I respected and love all these people that I've written about. But even if I didn't, I think I would, out of respect to my own parents and how much they felt for those people and how much they respected them, I'd still go through the same exercise. Because when you see a 76-year-old woman all of a sudden have her face light up like she's 8 years old climbing an apple tree across the road from the farm, and that's happening in real time, I don't know many things that are better than that.
I love it. I just had this image, the whole thing, both sides of the story. Tell us about the name of the book, Generation Jumping. Where'd that come from, and what does that mean?
Well, Generation Jumping. At some point, I probably need to admit that I am a writer, because I've been doing sports stories and articles on kids for 25 years, but that's more like sports and short stuff, just trying to lift kids up. But I've never been afraid to make up my own terminology if it made sense to try to describe something. I don't know whether it does make sense, but usually I get a pretty good response on it. But back in 2013, I was sitting in the living room of one of my mom's double cousins. And if you don't know what a double cousin is, it's basically when in my family, three brothers from one family married three sisters from a different family. So they were cousins on both sides. And those double cousins of my mom became like just aunts to me. They were all the same age. They all went to school together. To me, they're just special people. I just call them aunt. We're sitting in a living room. One of my aunts is passing away from cancer in the hospital, and a lot of the family was there. And I looked around the room, and we had sung some hymns and recited some scriptures and had some prayer time. And I'm sitting between my dad and I'm sitting between my uncle. And I look around the room and I realize that I am the only person not from their generation that is in this room. And it was emotional because I had just the ultimate respect for them. But that night in that room, on a difficult time for the whole family, I just came up with the term. I feel like I'm generation jumping. I'm jumping into the generation where I don't belong, although I've been very warmly welcomed and received. So I'm going to just go with it. And I wrote in the book even that I just took cues from my dad. I didn't need to be heard. This is the kids' table reference. I'm fine at the kids' table. I don't need to be heard. I can be seen. The adults can carry on. And that's where it all started. And I wrote that down. I made a note of it at that night somewhere in a notebook or something. As time went on, I realized this is what I've been doing and I continue to do. And that's where the title of the book came from.
I love that. It's so creative. Sometimes our creativity isn't intentional creation. It's just inspiration. I know in our family, like my sister, for instance, had 2 boyfriends in her life. And my cousin had 2 boyfriends in her life. And what happened was they both broke up with their boyfriends at the same time. So they switched boyfriends. And they were together for a while and they decided they liked the other person better and broke up and switched back. And I just thought that was the funniest thing. I thought, aren't there other guys out there besides just staying in this little pool? But I thought kind of neat how people kind of stuck close to home in things like that. It's so important to write down those stories. And that's one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you, to hopefully inspire people to, while they still can, write down the stories that they can remember from their families. So those stories can be passed on in one way or another. It doesn't necessarily have to be a published book, but some way to pass them on.
And that's why in the book, I came up with kind of 4 pillars. I didn't call them that, but the publisher did. Their urgency and action, tendency and relationship, anticipation and esteem. And then the final one is hope. And that first one is the urgency and action. And that's kind of what you're touching on there is, I say to my kids all the time, nature is happening around us all the time, 24 hours a day. If you go out in the woods and you spend some time there, you realize that life and everything is happening. And we just, either you're there to see it or you're not. And it's the same with this. These relationships are available and these people, death comes for all of us, unfortunately, but it's true. And so many times I can honestly tell you that the last thing I wanted to do was like, okay, we got to make this trip to Canada. We got to do this. There's no time in the schedule. There's this, all the things that we put in place of the things that we end up doing or not doing. And then I just said, no, this is the right thing to do is to go do these things. And the part about it that is not special to, it's not a me thing. It's available to anybody. But I almost guarantee you that if you do those things and take that urgency and that action, the reward is almost instant. And I never did it for reward in any way, shape, or form. But those conversations and those relationships with somebody that's going to die, whether you're there or not, makes a huge difference. And I'd like to think it makes a huge difference for them. And it's as rewarding for them as it was for me, just because of that intentionality to get there, to do it, to listen, to talk to them, to take them down memory lane and let them relive something that they hadn't thought about in 50 years. I don't know. Those are important things. And nobody can ever take those away from either one of you. And then in my case, to be able to write some of those things down and share those things, again, was never the intent. But I'm so happy that they've come about the way that they did. And truthfully, as my publisher or one of the marketing guys said, he goes, Steve, no matter what, whether you're a writer or not, or a storyteller or anything else, whether you think you connect with anybody or not, you are the only person in the history of mankind that's lived the experiences that you lived. And that may very well be every reason why you put it down or share it with somebody else, because it could connect with somebody that you had no idea even existed, much less went through something similar. And it becomes that piece that really makes a difference. So that was another big factor, really getting over the hump, as I was stuck on writing about my dad for months. I wanted to do everything under the sun that was not writing to avoid writing about my dad, even though I had already been through it 8.5, 9 years earlier. And that was a push that got me over the hump. Like, the perspective is unique onto each one of us. Go ahead and share it, because it might be a difference maker for somebody else.
That's right. I was just having a conversation the other day with my son about my aunt and uncle and where they lived. And I knew that he spent a lot of time out there when I wasn't with him, because my aunt loved to have any of the nieces and nephews come out to her farm that she had. And it was a great place for the kids to explore and to have experiences they wouldn't be having anyplace else. The same thing happened with me when I was a child, because my mom would drop me off with my aunt at the farm, and I had experiences there too. And I realized that I was getting some of the experiences mixed up between my experiences and my kids' experiences, and that his memories were different of some of the things that were there than mine were. And then I thought, well, it would be different because he was a child a lot of years after I was a child there. And we were talking to each other through our child's eyes. It was really interesting, the whole perception of things. And I think it's important to write things down so there's at least one point of view. And if you read perchance something that maybe one of your other family members read and you go, well, I don't remember that way, that's your memory. So we all have our own memories of what happens.
I look at that as, I know your program here is grief and happiness. And I look at that as a joy, as a happiness, because even though you experience something differently than your kids at different times, the key is that you had the experiences. And I think when I look back at those things, even though the memories might not be the same way my mom sees it or my cousin sees it, I'm just glad that we were all experiencing it, whether it was together or even at different times. And usually those are experiences that we remember because we enjoyed them. They were, something that was a part of our life. Like, man alive, I can't believe. And I was the same way. We went to New Brunswick to be on the farm, and I learned how to hay with my uncles and do all kinds of stuff. I remember getting thrown in a pickup truck to drive it when I was about 13, because the adults needed a tool back at the barn, and it was about a mile away, and it was a country road. And they said, no, you got to do it. We can't leave. And I'm like, okay, I guess I got to do it. I could also remember driving it, pulling the clutch on a tractor a little too quick and having my cousin do a backflip off the hay trailer. I don't think he's ever let me forget that, actually. But those are joys. Those are happiness. Those are times when the family's together and you're either, maybe you're working in the fields, but it's a good memory.
Oh, yeah. I had some private things that happened with my uncle there on the farm that the other kids didn't have the advantage of having those. He was a gunsmith, and he was the only one. We were in a small town, and he was the only one. So he had, if people needed work on their guns or that sort of thing, they'd bring him to fix. But he would make the most beautiful handles for guns. And I loved the creativity. I loved watching him do that sort of thing. And one time I was out there close to Easter, and he picked up this little piece of balsa wood. And right in front of me, he carved a bunny with ears and everything. I was a pretty little girl, and I just was so amazed by watching that bunny emerge from that little rectangle of wood. And I still have it. I do, but it also inspired creativity in me in a way that I love to do ceramic sculpture now. And I'm sure it has a lot to do with watching my uncle create something out of just a block of wood, became this adorable bunny, really, really cute bunny.
That's great. And that, again, that's the reward I'm talking about. I know you were a child and he was the adult at the time, but even if the shoe's on the other foot, there's reward in spending that time. And that's, among the reasons why I did the things that I did, which ultimately were the notes that became the book, because life is too short. And, if those people go away and you never see them again, but you had an opportunity perhaps to spend that time and to build another memory, or to be two adults making the memory privately or in a group of people. I count myself so incredibly blessed to have had the relationships, even as an adult, with these people before they were called home. Like I said, it's not a me thing. It's just being available to try to make a difference. A lot of times, my mom never had a license, so a lot of the times I was her driver to get her there. And then I would just chauffeur them around. And every time we did, I'd take them out to the old farm and the old farm roads, and I'd just ask questions because I don't know. I couldn't possibly live in the time they lived in when they were young. So let them tell their stories, let them sing their songs, whatever. But honestly, I mean, how is that a bad day? It's such a rewarding experience, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Oh yeah, you reminded me of in my family, my mom's sister was married and had 3 kids, and then her husband died very young, and I didn't know, I never knew how he died. And it turned out that he had MS, but well, what he actually died was from falling off the back of a truck
Oh,
when
wow.
it was going. And I never knew that story. But my aunt went on for raised her 3 kids by herself and did an admirable job, and they were all off on their own. And one of the gentlemen at church had lost his wife, and they got together and they decided to get married. Well, the family she married into were the best singers in the world. They just had beautiful singing voices, and we would get together and have family picnics in somebody's yard. It would just go over there, and they'd always sing, play guitar and sing. And they actually became a recording group. And it was the 2 fathers and a son out of that group of my half, I guess you'd call them half cousins. They're called the Sons of the San Joaquin. And their music is, I can just hear it going through my head right now. And it was such a beautiful way to get together with the family and just hang out.
That is awesome. That is fantastic. It's funny because in the book I wrote about one of my first exposures, at least that I call my first experience with grief or loss, was when I was 17 years old and my grandmother had died up in New Brunswick, Canada. And I remember going to that funeral and just being shocked by what I didn't feel. It wasn't bland. It wasn't dark and gray. It was colorful. It was vibrant. And yes, of course, there were tears and there was a lot of real somber respect in that room. But talk about singing. All my aunts sang, my cousins, my 3 sisters, who cousins of mine, have been a singing group for years. I don't know that they've published much, but they've done a lot of tours and churches and stuff like that. But I just remember walking out of that church that afternoon and almost feeling like I was going to be in trouble with my parents because it just seemed too fun. It seemed too light. It just seemed, I'm like, wow, this isn't what is on TV or what they show in movies. This was something else. And I remember asking my parents if my brother and I were in trouble because we kind of laughed a little bit with our cousins walking out of the church, and they had no problem with it because it was just a family gathering, and there was singing and there was respect and praise and a whole lot of hope. It was something that really kind of painted the picture for me the whole rest of my life. I mean, granted, my family's, like I said, a very strong Christian family of faith. So this has been a recurring theme. The grief part doesn't hurt any less, and it's not any less real, but neither is the happiness. The happiness isn't any less real, and neither is the joy. Those can happen at the same time, in the same space, and still both be very real and very authentic. And that's something I've kind of honestly hung my hat on over all these years, because I'm not afraid to let it wash over me and kind of take me down, but I'm not going to dwell in it and become desperate or in despair, because I know there is hope on the other side. There is the promise of restoration and reunion. And why wouldn't you be excited about that?
That's so beautifully put, the way you said it. And it's part of why I do grief and happiness, because I started out just working with grief with people to have them learn ways that they could write that would help them through their grief. And the more I did that, the more I thought, I don't want to stay stuck in this for the rest of my life, because I've been able to suffer great grief with 2 husbands that died. Wasn't just one, but 2, and going through a process with each of them. I knew that the last thing they would want was for me to sit around and be sad for the rest of my life. And I just decided there had to be a way that I could incorporate happiness into what I'm doing and what I do with grief. And I love that. I hear the best stories from people like you talking about how you can be happy when you're celebrating somebody's life. And it's so important for us to think about.
I wrote a note down about how hope redeems grief. And I don't in no way want to belittle any aspects of this because I know it's a very real thing. And I also know people really struggle to get past or through these things at varying stages and maybe not at all. But sorrow is not a waste. It's not a waste. It's pain, it's present, but it's infused with expectation of future reunion and restoration. And sorrow endures through pain, but it's not a despair to be consumed by. So that to me speaks exactly of your what you're doing with grief and happiness, because there is the reality of the grief and the sorrow and the pain that I honestly think if you don't have that, you don't care, in my opinion. But if you deeply care and deeply love and respect someone, there is going to be that sorrow, that grief, but there is also hope, which I equate to happiness, because to me, the truest joy and happiness is because there is hope. That's my terminology. It's just let it wash over me, let it beat me down, but just keep breathing and keep taking steps forward. And then from there, the verse I mentioned earlier out of Psalm 103, I don't want the wind to blow over it and the place not to be remembered. And that's why these short stories are being shared. But that's also in the happiness, is because that legacy is a word that continues to go, whether we're here or there or not. But I'd rather carry legacy because we have the opportunity to share all the things you've learned from your family through those get-togethers and everything else. We get to carry those. And I think just like any good steward, we should be carrying those things forward. And why would you want to do anything but perpetuate the very best version of those things? Not untruthfully, but just share the joys, because there were joys then, they should be joys now, and they could bring joy to somebody else who's going through something, in the future as well. So that's kind of my idea of legacy, is just carrying it and making sure that what has come before you isn't forgotten just because it's not here anymore.
That's right. And that's I think the message of this whole podcast today that I hope people will take with them. This conversation has been wonderful. You've brought back so many memories for me, just popping through my head as we've been talking with my family and how we've done things and what I've learned from my family and being with my family and how it's guided my life. It seems to me nowadays that we're getting so separated from everybody that people move away and they're not around family anymore. Interestingly, since I've moved to Hawaii, I've had a lot of family come visit me. A lot more than I ever have before. And it's been really interesting. My first husband, who died, was a lot older than I was. And his cousins, who were his age, came over. It asked me if they could come to celebrate their birthday. These two sisters, their birthdays about 10 years apart. And I said, sure. And we had more fun with me learning more about his family that I didn't ever know before. And it celebrated her 90th birthday over here. And I thought it's so cool to be able to see things through their eyes, because I wasn't actually alive when a lot of those things happened. So
Yeah.
it was really, really wonderful. So thank you so much for talking to us today. Tell people again the name of your book and where they can get it.
The book is Generation Jumping, Losing Those Who Are Not Lost, and it's on Amazon. It's through Westbow Publishing, so it's on the Westbow store page as well.
That's great. And we'll put that in our show notes too, so that you'll have the opportunity to read Steve's amazing stories. It's just beautifully done. And I love how you weave your faith in your writing. It's really beautiful.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so glad you were here. And to our listeners, I'm sure you're glad you were here today too, and that you'll come back again next time and listen to us some more. And I always thank you for your support. So until next time, aloha. Do you want more comfort and support and happiness? Join the Grief and Happiness Alliance at our free gatherings on Zoom every Sunday. Visit my website at griefandhappiness.com and read my books, The Grief and Happiness Handbook, and get your set of the beautiful Grief and Happiness cards. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast, rate it, review it, and binge listen to all of our episodes. I can't wait to welcome you back to another episode of the Grief and Happiness Podcast.